Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. If we could get our seats, we can get underway, and I think we can get you out of here on time for the rest of your afternoon agenda. I am, for those of you who don't know me, I'm John Field. I'm the Executive Secretary at the Pacific Salmon Commission offices. My day job is normally up in Vancouver, but really happy to see all of you here at our 40th annual meeting. And really glad that today's event can be part of this week. This seminar is another presentation in our ongoing series. Many of you, maybe all of you know, its overall title is Environmental Change in Pacific Salmon Management and the View from Each Side of the Border. Today's will be the 25th installment of the seminar series. That's intended to provide information from both Western and Indigenous perspectives on environmental change, including its effects on salmon across their life cycle and salmon management. Each seminar is recorded, camera's right here, and will be made available to the public via the PSC website and our YouTube channel, which I'm sure a lot of you have checked out already. And they'll be uploaded shortly after the event. These seminars have been held regularly for several years. The period between seminars has kind of waxed and waned depending on calendars and our ability to find speakers, but has involved speakers from the United States and Canada on a huge range of topics that you'll see if you go to the YouTube channel. Today, we're going to hear from Pete Nicklin, sitting here to my left, from the Chilcotin National Government on impacts of Tŝilhqox, or the Chilcotin River landslide, on salmon, just the beginning. For those of you who don't know him, Pete is a registered professional biologist with the College of Applied Biologists of BC for more than 25 years, and a former member of our PSC family from 2007 to 2020. Inside our community, his roles included serving in the PSC Canadian First Nations Caucus, our Chinook Technical Committee, or CTC, the Coho Technical Committee, and their various working groups. Pete is a subject matter expert for Upper Fraser River watershed salmon and a regular participant in the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat peer review process. He's also one of the original team members with the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance, a First Nations governed technical organization, Chilcotin National Government fisheries biologist since 2018, and has worked with First Nations throughout the Fraser River and marine approaches since 2001. When he's not doing all that, Pete's an avid outdoor adventure enthusiast, just learned today, connoisseur of heavy metal music, and husband of Kelsey Campbell, who I think many of you know sits on our Fraser River Panel Tech Committee. He was born and raised in Williams Lake, BC, which is still home for him and the rest of his family. Today, at the end of Pete's presentation, we'll have several minutes for Q&A. We've got microphones that we can move around the room, and people online. We've got a number of people online observing as well, and they'll be able to ask questions through Lori, and we'll look to her to tell us who that is. Those of you online can submit your questions via the chat feature, and Lori will keep monitoring that. And with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over to Pete.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the people of Warm Springs Confederate Tribes for allowing us to conduct this business here. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the TNG delegation. Down here, Chief Francis Lassise, Chief Roger William, and JP LaPlante. And thank you to the PSC for the invitation to present on this topic for the PSC Seminar Series. And a big thank you to my colleague, Michelle Tung, who was going to be a co-presenter with me, but was unable to make it here today. So I'm going to provide a few slides of context, and then we're going to get to what everyone was talking about, the landslide. So the Chilcotin are the river people. The Chilcotin Nation has fought hard and made huge sacrifices to conserve salmon over the years, including protecting the headwaters in their tidal lands where salmon return to spawn and rear. The 2014 title decision was the first declaration of Aboriginal title in Canada's history. The Chilcotin territory is a recognized salmon stronghold. One of the strongest sockeye runs in BC, the Chilco spawns in Chilcotin tidal lands. Two critical spawning systems, the Chilco and Tŝilhqox, have near pristine nursery grounds. The Chilcotin Nation continues to have a thriving traditional fishery, one of the most selective and sustainable in the world. And I'll draw your attention to this top photo here. This was in 2023, a PSC commissioner's tour that happened in tidal lands, and they are all standing under the entrance to tidal lands. The Chilcotin territory and the Chilcotin watershed is a salmon stronghold. Headwaters of the three major Chilcotin tributaries are all nurseries for salmon populations. Two systems are glacial headed and virtually pristine, the Tŝilhqox and Chilco. They have very cold water, which has an instant cooling effect when the fish turn into the Chilcotin watershed. And these salmon have a very difficult migration. They have to be very, very strong to make it to the headwaters. And the map here shows the Fraser running down north to south, and the Chilcotin watershed are the thick blue lines with the three key nursery areas, and there's some photos that indicate what you would see in those nursery areas. There's an importance to Chilcotin watershed stocks at a regional and international level. The salmon biodiversity is the foundation for the Chilcotin Nation's food fishery. Timing of the salmon returns span from early May for early time Chinook through until November for coho and steelhead. The salmon biodiversity in the watershed includes 5 distinct populations of Chinook within 2 stock management units, a subpopulation of interior Fraser coho, 3 distinct populations of sockeye, including the strongest annual Fraser sockeye population, Chilcotin River steelhead, and pink salmon on odd years. And stocks of specific interest to the PSC, Chilco sockeye, which is forecast to be 50% of the 2025 Fraser summer sockeye return, interior Fraser coho, which is currently in low status under the PST, and 2 coated wire tag Chinook stocks. I'll just highlight in the top map here, this is the Chilcotin watershed is outlined in black, and you can see kind of the scale when you apply that to BC. This is a very big area, the Chilcotin watershed. It's about 2/3 the size of Vancouver Island. Our expanding stock assessment and monitoring programs have resulted in one of the richest data sets in BC, and this work directly informs TNG pre-season fishing plans, in-season fisheries management, and recovery planning and initiatives. And on the map, this shows everything in black is part of our stock assessment and monitoring programs that we conduct every year. Now with the background, we can move on to shift over to talking about the Chilcotin landslide. Large landslides are relatively common in the Chilcotin watershed. However, the impacts from the 2024 landslide and breakout flood appear to have been significant and unique. On July 30th, a landslide blocked the Chilcotin River, a full head blockage hill slope to hill slope, approximately 600 meters across, 30 meters deep. The slide occurred downstream of all sockeye and Chinook spawning grounds during their key migration window. And for those of you that can't readily see the picture here, let's point this out. The fracture on the slide is up there on this hill slope. And the slide basically came down and went river valley to river valley with intact forest on top of the slide across the river. The water blocked by the slide filled the river valley, forming a lake or an impoundment that extended approximately 11 kilometers upstream. The lake inundated the river's banks and hill slopes, which are largely fine soils, resulting in extensive sloughing of hill slopes and wood debris accumulation into the temporary lakes. And downstream, the Chilcotin River was completely dewatered from July 30th to August 5th, except for minor inputs from downstream tributaries. And the photos from the left to the right are the dam and the impoundment. The middle photo is the large impoundment formed with extensive debris in that lake. And the third photo is downstream of the dam, which shows the dewatered Chilcotin River. On August 5th, the impounded water, the lake breached the dam. Within hours, the river exceeded typical peak freshet levels. The estimated peak of the breakout flood was 4 times the 1 in 1,000 year flood level, making it an extreme event. The floodwaters were heavily laden with logs and woody debris. The equivalent of 2.5 million dump truck loads were moved by the flood. The top 2 photos are before and after. You can see the same area upstream from Firewall Canyon, which is several kilometers downstream from the slide before the flood, and then you can see what has been washed away after the flood. And the bottom 2 photos show the breakout flood at the slide. The extreme high flows and debris from the August 5th breakout flood created massive erosion, destabilization, and recontouring in the channel downstream of the dam. Turbidity levels in the Chilcotin River downstream of the slide remained consistently high until a gradual decrease started in late August. Following the initial breakout flood, remobilization of slide debris resulted in 2 subsequent river blockages on September 16th and 18th, which both breached within 24 hours, resulting in temporary downstream dewatering and spiked turbidity post-breach. So the photos, the top one is downstream from the slide. Big Creek Confluence, that's its actual name. It's the largest tributary other than the 3 key tributaries downstream from the slide. We observed sockeye densely packed into the confluence, cleaning their gills post-slide breach. Bottom left is upstream of the slide, where it shows the impact of the impoundment, not even 2 kilometers upstream from the slide. On the right side of that photo is a ranch, and they lost a bunch of land where we had a major sloughing event a week after the breakout flood, which created another full blockage for several hours. And bottom right shows the Chilcotin and Fraser confluence, and fish were passing through this. That's the event. Now I'm going to talk about the response to the event. This graphic shows TNG's response to the original slide. Across the top are major events and communications. The bottom below the timeline shows in red the existing monitoring programs that we had in place, which I showed before. And the blue shows monitoring and assessment programs put in place in response to the slide. So the clock starts. The clock starts with the slide on July 30th. Then on August 2nd, TNG calls on the US, Canada, and the Pacific Salmon Commission, downstream First Nations, to protect impacted fish. On August 6th, TNG establishes the Collaborative Tripartite Emergency Salmon Task Force, which is TNG-led with TNG, DFO, and BC governments, with the UFFCA, or Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance, Indigenous partner, and Ecofish research technical support. And on August 8th, the task force begins their monitoring programs. As shown earlier, everything in black on the map was in place before the slide in terms of assessment and monitoring. Everything in red was put in place for the slide response. These responses include installation of Hansville sonar upstream from the slide to monitor and assess salmon movement through the slide area, additional helicopter assessments, Wi-Fi camera and weather stations, turbidity monitoring, total suspended solid sampling, LiDAR and drone mapping. And TNG's leadership has resulted in a highly responsive, collaborative, and technically rigorous process with tripartite TNG, DFO, and BC governments, and UFFCA and Ecofish Research technical support. So what were some of the impacts that we've seen? What we saw and experienced in season: major turbidity, holding salmon, delayed salmon, physically impacted salmon, evidence of mortalities downstream of the spawning areas, and subsequent sloughing and dewatering events causing physical barriers. Observable physical damage included lower jaw injuries, facial, eye, and gill damage, and general poor body condition indicating sustained stress to these fish. And I'd like to thank the TNG and DFO stock assessment ground field crews for collecting this information and providing photos like this that I can share. Now, what we're learning through our monitoring and assessment programs on the salmon side: Chinook and sockeye were delayed by combinations of high turbidity and physical barriers from sloughing events. And we've got a lot of ongoing postseason analysis. So I would call this kind of early days. The graph on the top right shows salmon passage at the Hansville sonar, and the bottom shows turbidity with the dashed red lines showing subsequent slides on September 16th and 18th with increased turbidity spikes and resulting protracted and reduced migration through the area. The impacts on early time sockeye populations were extreme. Early time Tŝilhqox and South End Chilco had near zero returns for all intents and purposes. We could not collect brood stock for emergency enhancement on Tŝilhqox sockeye when we went in to try to give the population a boost. So those red circles are the areas, the populations that were really affected. Further impacts on Chilcotin sockeye: approximately a 3-week delay, en route mortality impact of approximately 50% loss of Chilcotin sockeye from ocean return in-season estimate to spawning grounds. We saw a sex ratio skew in 2024, where we got 30% females and 70% males, which is actually just inverted perfectly from what we saw in 2023. We generally see a higher proportion of females than males in Chilco, and the exceptions are when real significant passage challenges have happened. 2019, the Big Bar landslide, and 2024, which we had extreme temperatures in the Fraser and the Chilcotin slide. We also saw significant physical damage. These fish were sandblasted by turbidity and injuries from migrating through highly turbid waters. We also need to consider cumulative effects. And the Chilcotin landslide impacts were cumulatively added to existing stressors. Fraser River temperatures were higher than average and generally not favorable to sockeye. These conditions persisted throughout the migration period. High Fraser temps created stress and mortality, and migration delay due to the slide resulted in even longer exposure to these high temperatures compared to cold water reprieve they would typically experience entering the Chilcotin River. All Chilcotin watershed salmon stocks are trending downward and/or of low status. Even the strong Chilcotin sockeye population is trending down, and 2024 was the lowest forecasted return on record before this event. Chinook stocks are generally declining. The lower Chilcotin and Chilco Chinook were delayed 2 to 3 weeks by the slide. And as I said before, this is early days for this analysis. We're still working to learn this through. Interior Fraser coho are of low status, and Chilcotin River steelhead are critically endangered. So we're now starting to understand the impacts from the slide and the breakout flood. Effects assessments to date find the outbreak flood and rapid drawdown of the upstream impoundment resulted in extensive erosion and localized bank failures from the top of the impoundment to the confluence of the Fraser River. These banks and slopes remain unstable and are subject to further slides that in some cases could result in full river blockages and turbidity impacts. Erosion at Farwell Canyon, pictured here, that would normally occur over a very long period resulted in a high risk of hill slope failure and rockfall in the short term and a high risk of impediment to fish passage. The risks and impacts of the slide on Chilcotin River salmon are not over. The most significant impacts may in fact be ahead of us. TNG and the Collaborative Task Force are working to continue to understand impacts to support development of mitigation options in advance of events. Ongoing resourcing and focus is required over this and the next years to address these impacts on populations returning to this watershed. We know there will be continued slide impacts in the years to come. Rockfall and sloughing events are considered imminent, with river ecology and fish passage impacts. I'm going to circle back to what I was originally thinking leading into this presentation. How can the PSC family work together and with TNG to best utilize our roles and levers to implement a new approach that meaningfully addresses the unprecedented challenges facing the salmon? What we can do in advance, anticipated cumulative impacts, now including known future impacts from the slide, can be integrated into the overall management framework to provide the buffer for healthy salmon returns to support recovery and that prioritizes the Chilcotin Nation's priority right to harvest. We can develop a responsive management approach that will adapt as slide conditions change and the significance of impacts are understood, pre-season, in-season, and related to the full fish life cycle. And a final thought on the slide response. TNG's leadership in the Chilcotin slide response has resulted in a highly responsive, collaborative, and technically rigorous tripartite process with TNG, DFO, and BC governments and our Indigenous partner, the UFFCA, which is a model for how we can continue to work together. And we continue to invite proactive, collaborative approaches to address this new challenge that impacts salmon that are important to all of us. Sachano ya, thank you. Thank you to the members of the TNG-led task force, TNG, DFO, BC, UFFCA, and Ecofish. Also, thank you to the PSC Canadian First Nations Caucus, the First Nations Fisheries Council, and finally, TNG and the Chilcotin people for being generous with your support and trust as we meet this challenge. And a big thanks to all of you for taking time from your busy schedules and your lunch to listen to this today. Thank you. Sure, you bet. Yep, sounds good.
Lori, do we have anything online or any?
Ignore that guy there. Last time he had a comment. Anyway.
Oh, wow, you got down the talk, you really got down. Presentation you gave us.
Kept it tight.
Very good, very good. I want, can you go back to that slide that shows, where you showed us on Sunday, the stress fractures for potential future slide, and just point out.
Oh, yeah. The Farwell one? You bet. Okay. This one. It might be easier to just hit the lights for a second here, because I'll actually point out what you're talking about. Yeah, so this is Farwell Canyon. The top photo here is during the breakout flood. This is a really big bridge that's really high. And when you compare the height of the water here moving down this way to after the breakout flood, and this is actually still kind of high water here, before and during the breakout flood, there's nothing going on over here on this big hill slope. This is like tens of meters high, like it's quite high. After this event, which lasted a couple of days, now you see the changes here. There's these massive tension cracks moving across this slope now, which different than the Chilcotin slide, these are rocks, not erodible soils, okay? So this is an area that we've turned a lot of engineering assessment focus on, and it is something that we're dealing with, that it's a result of the Chilcotin slide, but it's also potentially a different risk and imminent failure. So it's not, if I didn't make myself clear, it's not just one slide, it's like multiple things that are going on that we're still waiting for in this watershed. Okay. Did I actually answer your question? Okay, got it.
Any other question? Ken here in the front.
You told me not to. No, I just wanted, it was the same side too. I crossed that bridge a couple of times. Is it in imminent danger or is it, you know?
Engineers have said that the bridge is fine. The bridge actually is not a problem right now. It's all the rocks on this side, on the downstream side. Sure, yeah. Oh, I can't even see you back there.
But her, okay. So I was curious, Pete, that there's a couple of phrases that you use that I find interesting. They are cumulative effects.
Yep.
And life stage history. I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on some of those so that I get a bit more understanding what you mean by that. I'm pretty sure I get the
good catch. Yeah. Okay. Really good catch. So let me talk about the life history stage. We've been focused last year primarily on the adults and the adult return impacts, but we're now turning our attention to the smolts that are going out through this environment, which is, we're getting close. There's only a couple months away. So fortunately, one of our ongoing assessment programs with DFO, our collaborative partner on that, is the Sockeye Smolt Fence at the outlet to Chilco Lake. So we are thinking about research things that we might need to do to learn about what the effects from that might be. So in effect, that's one thing, smolts going out. There were also substantial changes to river ecology downstream and upstream from the slide event. And we are thinking about juvenile rearing impacts, particularly for Chinook, that may have been affected in that river ecology. So we're turning our learning to that. So that's the full spectrum. Okay. Does that answer? Right.
Are the Chilcotin Sockeye that we're talking about, are they 4-1, 4-2 or what?
Chilco Sockeye are 4-2. Yeah, there are some 5-year-olds that come back and there's a few jacks, but primarily they're 4-year-old. The Chinook are 5-year-old primarily, but there's a good 4-year-old component there too.
You've got Adam back.
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation, Pete.
You bet.
I see in the back that Adam Kaiser, Fisheries and Oceans.
Yep.
Fraser Panel. I think that context is an important question too about my role. So, first of all, I want to acknowledge the efforts of TNG and the other partners in the process. I felt very fortunate in my role as Fraser Panel Chair of the department to get near constant updates from folks like yourselves. I felt very plugged into the situation and consider how we as a department respond. My question is, what are some lessons learned from yourself and TNG on how you communicated with largely other Indigenous groups that were affected by this slide downstream and subsequent fishery decisions? Are there lessons learned about what worked well in communication and in making those subsequent decisions, or things that you might do differently when the next slide occurs?
Excellent question. Thanks, Adam. So on the communication side of things, this is one of the primary roles that the UFFCA had in terms of participating on the task force. So Gord Sterrett was actually, he's a member of the task force, and he's actually the first guy that I called after this happened, because the other thing that we were thinking that we drew on was the lessons learned from Big Bar. And the UFFCA and Gord played a big role in part of the communication and getting information to First Nations. So Gord continued to play that role, as well as providing some really good experience and information from Big Bar, so that we could shortcut a lot of hard lessons learned from Big Bar straight to doing the things that we thought were going to have the biggest impact and get us through the crisis. Okay, does that answer your question? You want to add to it?
Yes, and it's my place, but it's also a plug, I think, for the MOU that we observed yesterday and establishing some of those connections and communication protocols that have been built. So acknowledge work across a few fronts. Thanks very much, Pete.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I forgot, Adam reminded me I was supposed to introduce myself. So Don Hall on the Southern Panel. Building on Adam's question, you indicated a couple times in your talk about TNG-led process.
Yep.
Can you maybe explain to the audience a little bit more how TNG was able to get governments that may not necessarily work together all that well to come together and on this particular, in a particular response to the slide?
Good question. Well, okay, it's kind of a two-part thing. So some of the people, particularly on the DFO side, were part of the Big Bar response. So we drew on them saying, okay, we need to work together and move that forward in the same way as the UFFCA. On the BC side of things, we quickly found out that there was a lot of different things that we're actually dealing with in terms of how you respond to a slide like this. Many people throughout the Fraser watershed downstream from the slide, for instance, heard about like the evacuations, like getting out, the health and safety aspect associated with the slide. Okay, so there's a specific ministry in BC that deals with that. Then there's also these environmental things and forestry, a whole bunch of different lanes that people are in from BC, okay? We recognized that really, really quickly and took the lead because it just made sense for TNG to lead and bring all of those different lanes into one place to talk about things with respect to how do we respond to the slide. If it was left up to like a specific government entity like BC, it would be really, really fractured. They couldn't even really lead a response like this because it crosses so many different disciplines. But TNG and TNG Fisheries was really well positioned to harness and kind of coordinate and collaborate everybody together to have the right people at the table all the time. And this is an ongoing challenge as we move through different phases of assessments and learning. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Ethan, do you have one?
Yeah.
Haven't been comparable events to this historically. if not recently, historically, then within the history of the tribe or the First Nations within this basin? And are there observations that we've been drawn recently or from the First Nations experience that might lead us to some understanding of what to expect in the future?
Sure. Yes, to your first question, there have been other slides. 2004 was the last big one that caused a full river blockage. It's not in the same magnitude as this one was. That one cleared in a matter of hours and didn't do the same thing, partly because it was in a different place too. 1965, before that, you can dig up some historical records that shows that that was a substantial slide that happened there as well. So although this landscape is characterized by ongoing sloughing events that happen throughout specific parts of the watershed, this one elevates itself above those other ones that I've just talked about, 1965 and 2004. This is different. This one caused more instability and it caused a lot of downstream impacts for sure. So now to the history part of it, Farwell, which, what slide am I on here? Farwell and this area has a specific name in the Chilcotin language, which means, what's a direct translation? Chief Roger, Chief Francis is the land that moves, or?
Yeah, more like a landslide.
Landslide, okay. And that's the name of this area. So are these known impacts? Yes, that runs deep in the Chilcotin culture for sure.
By the way, the name is a past tense. Nicklin, it happened.
Right,
So it does happen.
right.
It doesn't say how often, but it's a Nicklin.
There you go, from the expert. Thank you, Chief Roger.
Thanks for the presentation, Pete. I guess just building on Adam's question about communications is, at least for sockeye, we're in quite a unique situation with the robust and comprehensive in-season management that occurs.
Yep.
And I guess just for TNG and the team working directly on this is like, what components specifically is important for us through your monitoring programs that we can put into, the in-season distributions that come out twice weekly. Last year, I participated on the task force, so it allowed kind of a direct avenue to communicate in season, but I think that there is other ways that we can formalize getting the information out in a more regular manner in terms of the Hanksville sonar and even turbidity levels, so that people can be well informed in season while this is occurring.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. I recommend that. We're going to have this task force going, and we're in kind of this winter period, which is actually very, very challenging for some of our monitoring systems that are in place right now. A lot of freeze thaw going on, or solid ice, all of those kinds of things. But in another month, all those monitoring systems are going to be coming back online fully. And I think that this is what the ask is, or what the recommendation is. I think that there's a potential to affect the larger landscape with what's going on here. And the offer is that we're collecting pieces of data that I think would be valuable for people to use in their planning, and potentially, certainly if a large event occurs, you want to be able to get that communicated to the right people so that good decisions can be made far outside of the Chilcotin watershed. Okay, so great question. I absolutely think that we should have some discussion about how to incorporate our key pieces of monitoring, salmon passage at the sonar upstream from the slide, those kinds of things turned out to be very, very helpful, because it's still like at least another 6-7 days. So a week from basically the slide through to arriving at our spawning ground assessments. So it's good to have an early look at that kind of thing. And in fact, we're working with yourself and the UFFCA on even looking at something like reestablishing a sonar on the Fraser potentially. That would be an early indication of salmon movement in the Fraser. Should we see something like this happen again? We want to know if we're actually slowing down fish in the Fraser as well. Okay. Thank you.
Then I think we have one in the back.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. My question is, do you know when the peak pressure or peak pressure discharge is in the Tŝilhqox area? And if that's been discussed as a potential time period where we could see increased risk of subsequent slides?
Yeah, end of June, beginning of July, those are critical timeframes. That's for peak freshet itself. But I will also say that the freeze thaw time of like March and April associated with the Farwell Canyon tension cracks and stuff is something that we're really considering. So there's like two time frames I would say that we're really focusing on here.
Thanks.
You bet. Dr. Ryan?
If you could scroll or go to the picture with the slide and the forest on it.
So that was not that one. There? Yeah.
Okay, so the forest doesn't look like something's going on there with the forest, right?
There was a burn there.
There was.
Yeah.
Have you had any type of evaluation of what the contribution was to that activity and actually contributing to the slide?
Outside of my area of expertise, but what I've been told is that this likely was probably not directly attributable to that at this time. So, but causation is kind of a hard thing to determine in a case like this. Having said that, this is still being looked at very hard to see if, in particular, the first fire that went through there, if that would have contributed to what's going on. Statistically and significantly, it's pretty hard to pin things on it right now, but we're still learning. Yep.
The combination of volatile geology in that area, you think that there would be some level of caution and prescriptions that would accommodate avoiding slide conditions by certain activities.
I agree. And this is part of the cumulative effects piece too, right? One in and of itself is probably, that's not the one you pin everything on, but when you stack them all up, that's when you get a problem. And then it's hard to find that particular one that may have been the catalyst to drive the entire thing forward.
Complexity.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi,
Hi, Jeremy.
hi, Jeremy Maynard, Southern Panel. You'll have to forgive my unfamiliarity with the geography and where the fish spawn. And I'm looking at the lower bullet there where it says the slide occurred, below or well below much of the spawning grounds. And so I guess what I'm I'm hoping is there's a little glimmer of good news in here in that the over-summering Chinook fry, I'm assuming the Chinook smolts probably would have exited the river system prior to when the slide event occurred. And so the concern is for the fry that would have been over-summering in 2024. Can you describe the likelihood or what you think might have been the share of the total Chinook fry production? For example, I'm assuming the sockeye fry are up in the lakes. that would have been impacted by both the dewatering below the slide and the impoundment that went for many kilometers upstream. Obviously, that would have had effect. But I'm hoping to hear that maybe more of the Chinook rearing area was well upstream of even the impoundment.
That's what we're thinking. That's a good question. So you're wondering about, maybe I'll just point out, I made the comment before. These are what we call the nurseries, okay, that are circled here. This is the Dasyko or Tŝilhqox River system here with Big Lake, Sockeye are in here, Chilco Lake, and the rivers, and that's the little Chilcotin up there. So we have Chinook in all three of these areas, okay? So those are up there. The slide was here. So that's not that far from the Fraser. It slips my mind right now, but I think it's probably on the order of like 30 to 40 kilometers or so river length through here up. Then 11 kilometers from here up, we had this impoundment, which would create a bunch of instability and everything like that. To get to your question, these are, from what we understand, and we're still unwinding the juvenile life history and all of that stuff. This is like critical areas for Chinook. Sockeye obviously are in the lake. Same thing for that. The little Chilcotin is a little bit different. They are likely spread everywhere. The Chinook fry. Most likely they're also down here in the main stem, but it's one of our questions that we need to answer. Was it suitable for them to be using this, and are there impacts to what's called the river ecology? So that's one thing that's going to be a longer term science question that we're trying to answer. Because to put it into perspective, downstream from the slide event, there were a bunch of areas that were impacted that had like 200-year-old to 250-year-old fur that were like taken out. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what an extreme event this was. And there's a lot of channel widening going on there. And we're looking at potential like braids that didn't exist there before, all of those kinds of things. In some of those areas, there were likely that was habitat that was affected. I have no doubt. Especially got to think about steelhead too, because they overwinter and move back and forth in that system too, right? Yep, adults, and likely we've got the juveniles there too. Yeah. You bet. Got a couple at the back, Diego.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
You bet.
I just wondering if you could speak to your proactive efforts and planning for the future potentially imminent slides, and any lessons learned on how we could be, more proactive in managing our environments.
That's a tough question, but thanks, Jared. Let me think. I try to assemble all of this stuff. We were in a really good place before this slide happened because of one of the things that we have is a really comprehensive stock assessment program throughout the watershed. We also have water stations, water quality and quantity stations throughout these key nursery areas and in the main watershed there. Those are the black sort of teardrop things going on here. All of this to say, we really had a pretty good baseline understanding of the habitat and understanding all the stuff that is in and around the places that salmon are. So it starts with that, like really understanding the entire area. And that puts you in a good place to kind of, if you've got an event that happens in a particular area, you can kind of key in on what the important things are likely going to be. Like for instance, for example, we did have start of the year, we've been testing a sonar down here, which was gonna be like assessing salmon passage. All species, as soon as they go from the Fraser and into the Chilcotin watershed, okay? When the landslide happened, I mean, it was all super dangerous down here and everything anyways, but we took this and we knew of an area that we could put a sonar in a matter of hours upstream from the slide, because that was gonna be our key indicator of how to figure out when do we see salmon moving. So that's an example of just being prepared ahead of time to eventually respond to this. We had no idea we were going to be dealing with this, but it really did put us in a good place to have that knowledge.
So thank you.
You bet.
Who was next? I'll go through the mic in my hand. Jared, there's a great segue to the thing I was gonna ask is, and this is a bit of a selfish question, so please indulge me, Pete. I've heard a lot of good lessons learned are knowing the area well, having the information to help inform fisher management decisions. Where I'm involved myself is as a resource manager. When the slide happens, I have relatively few tools at my disposal. Open, close the fishery, that's about it. Is there other preventative work that could be done, or is it just an unreasonable? I think of these stress fractures. Like, is it just a matter of us waiting for the next slide to happen and then hope that it's not in a bad time of year? Or is there other preventative work that could be undertaken?
This is part of what, in the background, this is what we're working on. Great question. Are there ways that we can potentially mitigate some of these things that we see as imminent risk? And Farwell is one thing that we're exploring very, very closely. So we are in the middle of figuring out what potential kinds of things we might be able to do in order to lessen the potential impact that this is going to cause. We're doing things like we've got engineers that are modeling scenarios based on instability. What happens if this falls in like that? And you can kind of go through the gaming process. And part of that whole gaming process is, are there ways that we can make this better right now? And just when you think about the amount of effort and resources that were put to something like the Big Bar landslide, I would say this is something that needs to be resourced more than it is right now. Okay, so I really appreciate some of the funding that's been put in place and everything like that. But given the stakes of what might happen here, I think there's some more that could be thought about. Okay, thanks. But we are thinking about potential ways to mitigate the risk or the outcome.
The back there.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's Greg Knox with the Northern Panel.
Hi, Greg.
Is there work being done to reduce harvest impacts on Chilcotin salmon in the coming years to mitigate for the slide impacts and allow for ensure that they're rebuilding or there's no spawners going back?
That's a tough question. I mean, the first thought is let's start with what happened in 2024. If we had a similar event happen again, depending if we had exact same time, the lesson that we learned from here is that we lost 50% of the run from the in-season ocean assessment until they arrived at the spawning grounds, okay? It starts with being precautionary and looking at what's happening here. So that's one option that should probably be considered in terms of fisheries planning, is what would a worst case scenario look like? What does, a 25% kind of thing look like? And factor that into the overall fishing plans. We're all in this together. That's the message, right? Ethan and then Ken. Pardon me?
Could this possibly be a good thing? Or catastrophic events that are implicitly occurring right now into the near future?
break that down a little bit more. A good thing in what sort of scope or scale?
Obviously, you've had a large scale recruitment of potential spawning ground in this area. It does not look like this has historically been a large spawning area for any species in the past. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Maybe pink salmon. Yeah.
Is there a possibility for populations to recruit to this area in the future, or I know nothing about this area, so I'm getting an understanding of what the possibility might be, not, 5 years down the road, but for.
Anything's possible, but I would say the preferred ground for coho, Chinook, and sockeye would be, they're going to go back up into those nurseries. That's like, they're going to want to go back up there. And given where the slide is and the impacts down there, I would say we're probably unlikely to see a net benefit, with the exception of possibly pink salmon. And all we can do is kind of get to understand how the river ecology, substrate, and everything has changed, and then see if we are in fact seeing opportunity where there wasn't before. So it's a tough one to answer, Ethan, for sure.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I guess the thing that I'm wondering about is that, do you know what triggers the out-migration of the 5-2s and the 4-2s, and we should be looking at, make sure that they're able to survive. And I was thinking about the Chilhqox sockeye in a question too, because they're not like other sockeye. Like you mentioned that they move into the lake.
You bet.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, good question. So the good thing is we have the Chilcotin smolt fence, that's DFO led project that we have crew members fully integrated in that project. That's a really good learning opportunity and potential to figure out, can we understand how the slide might affect the sockeye smolts this spring. So the timing trigger on that is like April and May, basically. We'd be thinking about those kinds of things, and combine that with our other monitoring that's going on there. I think we'll just be piecing stuff together. Now on the Chinook side of things, that's a bigger thing. And I'm going to look to one of my mentors, Richard Bailey. Do you have any comments on that from the Chinook smolt kind of thing? I mean, we've got coded wire tag programs too. We do releases in the river, April 15th. There may be some opportunity there as well. I'm not sure, but keep it short, Rich.
We know the fish from up there are timing they're on the front end of the ascending limb of the freshet. It causes them to enter the Gulf of Georgia Salish Sea at the right time for them. So can we assess the impacts on those Chinook? I'd argue there may be possibilities, but really the biggest assessment we're going to see is when they return.
Yep,
because
you're right.
And in just briefly with the other questions earlier about the habitat downstream there, we know that Chinook do rear all the way through that system. So
and into the Fraser itself. Yeah.
Down into the Fraser itself. So there are some portions that would have been impacted, and there hopefully are significant others that weren't. And in the return years, 4 and 5 years from now, hopefully we can institute more otolith microchemistry work to figure out what kind of impact that might have had on various segments.
Good one. Thanks, Rich. That was short for Rich, by the way.
You're all leaving lots of time for questions, so this is good. I really appreciate the dialogue after.
Yeah, you bet.
To Adam's question earlier about, engineering solutions, just an example, on the couch, and there's a split plug. And I'm looking at John, how much has been spent on that. You know, I know the endowment fund has spent a lot on it, but I bet it's well over $1 million, you know, just on one bit in the river that was slopping off into the Cowichan River. And they had an opportunity, you know, to do some engineering there. You know, this looks like an order of magnitude worse.
It's big.
Area to work, access to roads and everything else. Sort of like, yeah, you deal with Big Bar, right? Building roads into the area to do any kind of work. So it just seems initially unrealistic to imagine there are engineering solutions and really are just we're playing this waiting game of, you know, when's the next hillside going to come down and how bad is it going to be at the time of year that it hits. And that gets really, I was going to ask a question about this. Okay, I mean, the last 5-6 years, Big Bar, we had a huge flood in 2021 from the atmospheric river that hit BC. There was a big slide from Taku that was, I think, also across channel, blocked the river. It just happened at a better time of year, and the river was able to rechannel all this for, you know, salmon migration. And we have the Chilcotin slide now that we're talking about. Intermixed in there, we've had record high flows in the Fraser and record high temperatures. So my question, is anybody cataloging all these events? Is anybody trying to quantify the severity of the events in some way, whether it's salmon or geological or however we could quantify that? Just so we start to, and then the other would be the frequency of these events.
Yeah, is increasing. Yep.
Question before. Obviously, this area is prone to slides, happened before, but so anyway, I would start to see, if nothing else, that's sort of our baseline, new baseline information on, you know, how fast are things changing, and are these events what seem to be coming more and more frequently? You know, is that real, and can we, you know, can we assess that anyway through the historic record to see if what my impression is these things are hammering, you know, salmon every few years now.
Yep.
Is that something that's real, and I'm starting to keep track of it. I think that at least is a start, and I don't know if anybody's doing that right now, but I think that would be a worthwhile project for somebody to take on. Thank you.
Good comments. And you brought this, I'm glad you brought this up, because you also brought this up during my peer review on Sunday when you suggested some improvements. So this is actually what we need to be thinking about here. And this needs to be incorporated at the broad scale as we move forward. Like, these things are not an isolated event. They've been happening all over the place. So we need to start to think about not necessarily preventing stuff, but how do you work your way through this in the overall management system, and think about this in the bigger scale across species, across different watersheds. So yeah, that is certainly one of the things that I was thinking about in doing this presentation as we came here today, and the subject is what environmental change. And yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thanks for humoring me to speak into Don's question. There are a couple of points there. There is research that I know is occurring at Simon Fraser University to assess points of risk along the Fraser watershed, future slides. And I think that's an interesting avenue to maybe compile some of the inventory pieces that you mentioned. The next question for me, and that's a great point, is then how do we account for this within our management regime? From a Fraser panel perspective, I think Greg mentioned that earlier too. I offer a plug of the Secretariat's work, where we do have our in-season management adjustments that account for environmental conditions. And something that we received at our presentations at panel meeting this week was, at very least to start, some of the lessons learned, like you mentioned, Pete, about 50% mortality on route. Yep. Is at the very least a placeholder, a proxy that can be applied to our in-season Fraser management when a slide occurs. So it's not the final answer, but I do want to provide some hope, some light for us that as a result of the work that's been done by the TNG, by the Secretariat through the Fraser panel process, we have started to develop some means to provide responsive in-season measures when these events occur. That's also why I'd asked the question of what can we do to be preventative, and Don, your context about how expensive it really would be, is helpful. It also gives me a lot of anxiety to think, okay, so let's just hope that the slide happens at an opportune time. It's a challenging state to be in.
Thanks, Adam. Well, I'm really encouraged, and I've been observing the Fraser River panel for the last couple of days and have make myself available to answer questions as they come up for the Chilcotin landslide. And I'm really encouraged to hear like some of the things that have landed on the table now, like thinking about, you know, what would a management adjustment look like pre-season, to think about, run a few scenarios. It doesn't cost anything to run scenarios, right? But formalize it as part of the analysis that's going in. And we've got some pieces of information that could provide some substantial, I would say, you know, relevant information for that process. So, yeah, we're absolutely willing to work with the Fraser River panel and the Pacific Salmon Commission. And this is part of it. This really is like being invited to talk about this kind of thing. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks. Teresa.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that 50% loss is actually conservative, considering that your male-female ratio shifted so dramatically.
Good point.
And
yeah. Yep.
There's more.
Yep. Yeah, there's persistent things, and that's what that's one of the things that we need to figure out with Chinook too, is like it wasn't so readily obvious that they didn't look like in as bad of shape as what the sockeye did, but there's stuff that's in there that's going to be moving forward. So that's one of the research things that we're looking at.
Maybe Chief Francis here just reminded me on February 24th, TNG will be launching a report. It's like a lessons learned in partnership with a few professors, one at UBC and one at York University, compiling lessons learned. And that's from not just a fisheries management perspective, but I think it'd be of interest to governments and also, you know, other First Nations and tribal governments as well. So yeah, I think you could, we'll be at UBC that day, but it'll also be available on our website. And I think portions of it already are available on our website.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Chief Francis. Awesome.
Greg Litzke, Mid-Fraser panel. So I was involved in a study that was just mentioned by Adam on Fraser. Too bad it didn't go into the tributaries, but there's 13 major sites on the Fraser that could be major landslide in the future. So probably a good idea to do that same similar study here on the Chilcotin. I did have a question. Is there any plans on a river flow before freshet?
Like data collection? Yep. As soon as we can get that stuff mobilized and not frozen in the ice and everything like that, we'll go back to monitoring that. We've got some pieces, but we need some more. Yeah, winter's a challenge. But the information flow is going to be starting again. And on sort of an official basis, the TNG Emergency Salmon Task Force was issuing situation reports, which were going out, which are available. A number of people were hosting them on their website, and you can get that and find them on the TNG website as well. So Chilcotin.ca, and then look in there. All the old situation reports are there, which has data, events, those kinds of things. That'll be starting up again as we move into the season.
Any other questions?
Very usual question. Will this presentation be available, for example, through the commission website? So
Yeah, okay, that was the other thing. That's a really good question. So some of the slides that I built here are really heavy on the text, but I wanted to be able to share that with people that might not have the context. So rather than having, you know, a bunch of just a few bullets that don't really mean anything, I wanted to make sure that if people wanted to see this presentation, they can pretty much read it and know what I talked about here today. And then there's some other stuff that you'll probably talk about of where people can access this, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Just
Yep. Thanks, John.
Right, Jeremy, not only will the video of today be posted on the website and the YouTube channel, but you'll be able to download the slide deck as well. That'll be on the website if you go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Any other questions? Are we wrapping it up? Okay. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. And Pete, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you around the halls.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. That was really good.
Thanks. Okay. What you